Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the That's Where I'm At podcast. Today, I cannot wait to have this conversation. My friend Amanda is here. She's a wife and a slay at home mama, and she's a former cult member. She's going to talk to us about that today. Although it took years, she found healing and understanding of the why and how this could happen to someone like her. Her goal is to help others to avoid the path she took and to know there is hope if they're on the path currently. She speaks on healing from domestic violence, emotional abuse, church hurt, and infidelity in marriage, which are a lot of big things. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you.
I am so glad you're here. So today we're talking about, it was so interesting when I was asking for people to come on my show, you reached out and said, well, I used to be in a cult. And I was like, I got to hear this. And it's such an interesting story, not just because of the cult part, but how and why, right? The whole thing is like, we can stand on the sidelines and go, girl, how'd you get in a cult? But she's going to tell us and how we get into situations without even realizing that we're in that situation. So Amanda, let's talk about how you got into the cult. So first thing I want to talk about is maybe your family life, what that was like. Did that affect that?
Yeah. So I grew up, my parents are still married. They've been married forever and a day. And they're super amazing. We went to the Catholic Church growing up. And so I was super, super involved in church, like there at every single mass, every single weekend.
Okay.
I had a different job. And I was like, I don't even know how to explain it. I was pretty high up in the hierarchy of our parish.
Okay.
My senior year of high school. So I oversaw our worship commission, which was basically the highest non-priest position you could have.
Wow. Okay.
Which was ridiculous. I was like 17.
Oh my gosh.
And so here I am, I'm this teenager and I'm like being exposed to all of the back end stuff, like the stuff that goes on at churches and everywhere, like
the behind the curtain stuff.
Yes, behind the curtains. And
Don't
I was
look
like,
behind the curtain. The wizard is back there.
oh my gosh, what is going on? Like, this is not what I want to be part of.
Right.
So I left the Catholic Church and just started visiting other churches with friends like throughout that summer after my senior year.
Okay.
I had a lot of personal stuff going on at the same time. All of my friends had gone off to college and I stayed locally to go to college instead of going away because my grandfather was dying. And so there was just a lot emotionally.
Yes.
And I felt like I had gone from having this huge group of really tight friends. We did everything together. We had like the same core values.
Yeah.
Like we weren't drinkers. We weren't, going out and smoking weed every weekend or anything. We just liked to hang out and have fun. And so I lost all of that when I went to college. There were only a couple of us who stayed local.
Yeah.
And so I kind of felt just in a lot of areas of my life, like I was just kind of at a loss, kind of untethered, if that makes sense. Like just
no connection.
Yeah.
And how was it? Can I ask, how was it like did you have friends in the Catholic Church and did you like lose those friends when you were no longer attending there?
Yes.
It's a podcast, Amanda. You can say more than one word.
I'm just gonna be honest. What I have learned is that a lot of church friends are friends of convenience.
Yes.
You go to the same place every week. You do the same things. You're in the same Bible study together.
Yeah, so you see each other.
And so you're friends because of that. But then once you're not going to the same place every day, or it's like when you quit a job, right? Like you think you're best friends with the people that you work with, but then you don't work there anymore. And 2 weeks later, you never talk again.
I have noticed that since I stopped being a speech therapist. I'm like, Where'd all my friends go?
Right? So it was kind of like that. And I think a lot of that would have happened naturally, especially if I had gone away to college. It would have been very similar.
Yeah.
I maybe would have seen people when I came home, for breaks or whatever, but
Mhm.
like we wouldn't have been close anymore.
Okay.
So I was on campus, just doing the school thing. I was living with my parents. I was going to college.
Okay.
And one of my closest friends had stayed local to go to school as well. We were at the same school. And somebody stopped him on campus and said, "Hey man, do you want to come visit the church that I go to?"
Oh, jeez.
Now, I hate to say that if you experience that, you should automatically say no, because I'm all about inviting people to church.
Right, of course, me too.
But but it was not a great experience. Um well, in hindsight, it was not a great
Okay, in
experience.
hindsight, yes.
In hindsight,
At the
in the moment,
beginning, at the beginning, we loved it.
it seemed amazing. So
Okay, so
my
you
friend came to
decided,
me.
oh, okay, your friend came to you. Okay,
My
tell
friend
me.
came to me. He's like, "Hey, so you're my church friend. Will you come with me and see if this seems legit?" And I was
Oh,
like,
okay.
"Whatever, sure."
Right. And were you still searching at that time? Because
Yes.
I totally remember doing that in college.
Yes.
Yes.
So I had left the Catholic Church. I hadn't found any place else to belong. So I was like, "Yeah, I'll go to this church with you and we'll check it
Mhm.
out." So he and another friend of ours and we went and we checked out the church, and by like halfway through they were just done. They were like, "Nope, not even
Oh,
like, nope."
so what was it to them that was nope?
I don't know.
Oh,
I
interesting.
I wish that we had had that conversation.
Right.
Um but for me it was amazing. Like, I went from this church that was like dark and old and nobody talked, and
Okay.
they played like, I don't know if you've ever been to a Catholic mass, but the
Yes.
music can be
Was there an organ?
heavy.
Yes.
It can be heavy. I
Yeah.
actually did Gregorian chant. Like, I chanted some
Oh,
songs.
oh my
So
gosh.
like it was that
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
like that.
stuff, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And so this church met in a hotel in downtown, and it was bright and open and everybody was hugging and they had their Bibles and they
Oh,
were like
wow.
talking to each other and friendly and just like really excited. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
This is it.
This is it." There were a couple people there that I already knew, and I was like,
Mm.
"Okay, well, that lent it some credibility." Like,
Mhm.
the
Right.
cute guy from my French class was there, and I was like, "Well, if cute guy from French is there,
Then it
like,
must be
it
okay.
must be okay."
Oh my gosh. Okay. How many times have we sold ourselves out for a cute guy from French class?
I'm just saying, like,
I've been there.
oh, youth, the innocence of youth.
That's right.
So one of the girls who was a member asked me if I wanted to come to their Bible talk, which was like their weekly small group meeting.
Okay.
And so I went, and after that, they asked if I wanted to study the Bible,
Mm.
which I thought was like mind blowing, because not something that I did in the Catholic Church at
Right.
all.
Yeah, and
It
some
was not
and a lot of them,
encouraged.
right, it's not encouraged, or some of them don't, I think there are some that do, but no, I remember I grew up Catholic as well. I
Yeah.
don't remember that's not something that we
Yeah.
did.
It's more common now. Like, there are a
Mhm.
lot of progressive parishes that do have like Bible
Mhm.
study, and they do small groups and outreach and stuff. But back in the late 90s when this was
Mhm.
happening, that was just not the norm.
Okay.
And so um I I started studying the Bible with them, and they took me through a study series called First Principles.
Mm.
And every person who joins this church goes through the exact same study series.
Okay.
Um and so it starts out, it's so tame. Like, what is a Christian?
Okay.
Right? Like,
Okay. It seems
they
innocent enough to what
it's
they're
right,
telling
like,
you. Okay.
You know that word picture of the frog being boiled, like you put it in the pot and the water's warm and it's
Oh
like,
my
ooh, this is relaxing. So like,
yes.
and then all of a sudden it's boiling and you're like,
And you're like, oh crap. Like, oh
all right,
no.
now I'm stuck. I can't get out of here.
Okay.
So so the first study was on, they call it discipleship, and it's like, oh wait, is the word study first? I can't remember. I think the word study might be first. It's like, what is the Bible? Right?
Okay.
Like, it's the word of God. Do you agree? Is it the word of God? And you're like, yeah, duh. Like,
Okay.
okay.
Right.
And so then they talk about what a disciple is, and it's a follower of Jesus
Hmm.
who, makes other disciples and seems innocent enough. But then they start talking about how they're the only disciples. And you're like, well, I mean,
Oh my gosh.
maybe, I don't know. But then you get farther and farther and you study like what the church is, and they're like, we're the only ones doing this. And you're like, I don't know. But the
But even
thing is,
then,
like, we've all gotten into a situation in our lives where we look back and we're like, how the heck did that even happen?
yes, I was
Right?
just listening to a podcast this morning. It's an entire series about this girl who ended up with somebody that's terrible. And she was like, I think back and I'm like, how did I do that? Like of the things that I did, how did I do that? I mean,
Right?
I've been there too. Well, okay, so that's good. That's why we're talking about these things because we gotta tell people.
Because what I want is for people to know, like, this could happen to you too. It's really easy
It's very
when you
subtle.
when you talk about cults. It's very, very easy for people to like think that could never happen to me, or that
Right.
could never happen to my child. I raised them better than that. And what I want people to know is, like, my parents raised me better than that.
Right.
Like, I was not a stupid person. I
Right.
graduated from the best high school in the city with honors.
Right.
Like, I'm not dumb. That's
Right.
not what it was. It filled a need for me.
Yes.
One
That's
of the
really
things,
key. That's really key that it felt
right? One of
earned.
the things that this group is known for is something called love bombing. And so there I was a freshman in college. I felt untethered. My friends had
Mhm.
gone away to
Yeah.
college. I felt lonely. I had left the church that I grew up in. So I
Mhm.
felt very at a loss there.
Yep.
And here they came and they were like, instant best friends, wanted to do something with me all the time. I was never alone. Um,
Oh. And do you think that's what
and
was by design?
yes, that's
Okay.
absolutely by design. Um, Never alone, always had somebody there, always somebody who wanted to hang out. So it felt good. I felt
Yeah.
popular. I felt wanted. I felt like I was part of something.
Yeah.
And then there was the whole church thing. And, you know, the Catholic Church, maybe not so much now as back then, but the Catholic Church was also very much like, we're the only ones going to heaven. Everybody else is wrong. And so it
Okay.
was not a foreign thing for me to be part of a church that
That was
proclaimed they
saying
were the
that.
only true church.
Yeah.
And so that met a need for me, like, to
Mhm.
know that I was right, to know that I was on the path,
Right.
um and I didn't have to think about it.
Mhm.
Like, they told me what to do, they told me where to be, my days were scheduled. Um so it was just, there was great comfort in that. I wasn't
Yeah.
alone. And so it happens very easily. It's
Mhm.
so much easier than you think
Right.
to end up in a controlling situation,
Mhm.
whether that's a religious situation or
Mhm.
a marriage or a toxic friendship. Like,
Yeah.
it happens so gradually that you don't realize it. And a lot of
Mhm.
times you don't realize it until you reach that point where you're more uncomfortable with what you're going through than
Yes.
the comfort you're getting from the situation. And
Mhm.
so you have to reach that pain point for yourself. Like, my parents, they tried so hard. I was living with them. My mom would rip up all of my books from church and leave like
Wow.
a pile of torn paper on my pillow. They tried to have me deprogrammed. They like
Oh my gosh.
blocked my car in the driveway so I couldn't leave, and left me in the house with the pastor for like 6 hours
Oh my God.
to like try to deprogram me. They took away my tuition. They
Just to
basically,
get you to stop doing
yes,
whatever.
yes, like, unless you leave this church, we're not paying for school. Like, I moved out. After my freshman year of college, I moved out. I didn't live with them. They weren't paying for school. Like, it was just, they tried so hard to get me
Mhm.
to see what was going on, and I couldn't. And
Yeah.
I think that's really hard, because I think people, when you see someone you love
Yeah.
in a situation like that, your immediate response is to do whatever you can
Right.
to get them out of it. But many times it will have the opposite effect of what you're hoping.
Okay.
So, um,
They might dig
the,
in deeper and
you dig in deeper, right?
okay.
So what we were told, is that it was persecution, and that meant you were doing what God wanted you to.
Oh.
And so the more my parents talked bad about the church, the
Yes.
more I knew it was where I was supposed to be.
Oh my
So it
gosh.
just pushed me deeper and deeper and further in.
Oh,
It wasn't until years later, like 6 years later, that it became apparent to me
right.
that this was a crazy place and I needed to leave.
Well, and I want to talk about that because unless somebody's ready, I had a discussion with on another episode, the healing from emotional abuse episode, because we talked about when is it time to leave, and she said you will know, but no one can tell you before that. No one's going to be able to say,
No.
"Hey, look at this," because like you are in the background being told, "Hey, that's a good thing. If your parents are against you, this is a good thing. It means you're on the right path."
Mhm.
And so that's really scary, that
Yeah.
would be happening. So, okay, so at this time, I know that this is really the beginning. I know you were in it longer than this. So tell me what kinds of things are happening. Um, I'm looking, I'm looking at my notes
Oh,
because I
you're
want.
fine.
One of the things we talked about, well, what was it about you? But we kind of touched on that. What was it about you that allowed this thing, right? But
Right.
we touched that on that a little bit. You were lonely, your friends, the whole situation on
Yeah.
that. So that was what made you susceptible. And unfortunately, a toxic, toxic people, abusive, emotionally abusive people,
Yeah.
or churches or anything will look for people like that,
Yeah.
that need a friend or whatever it is that their situation. So tell
Yeah.
me, so then did you continue? Okay, so you moved out and then did you
Yes.
continue the relationship with your parents or did they kind of,
So it was pretty strained for a couple years. I moved out and I lived, most single people live in like basically group housing.
okay.
So I had numerous roommates over the years. It was always at least one other person, but usually it was like three, four, five people in the same apartment.
Wait,
Um,
was this for the church or for the cult? Oh, okay. I know they're
yeah,
calling themselves a church, but they are not.
yes, yes, they're not. Yes,
They use the word church in their title, but they are not.
they are not a church. Um, so so I was living with roommates and I would move. My mom was like, I put your address in my phone book in pencil because you move so often. And I was
Oh my
like,
gosh. Gosh, mom.
it's true, I do.
Yes.
Um, so I would move often and it was just so hard. Like, our schedules were insane. There was something like we had Wednesday midweek, Friday night devotional, Saturday we went on obligatory dates. Sunday we had church. If you were a leader, you had the leaders meeting. You
Wait,
had
you
your
went on
discipling time.
you went on
Yep,
dates?
obligatory dates. So
What? Wait, did they set you up with who you were going on a date with?
not really, but you
But they
couldn't go out with the same person too often.
Okay, because they want, okay, but what if you wanted to get married or something?
You
And
had to get permission.
oh my gosh. But you were still thinking this is fine. This everything's fine.
I mean, I was not popular in high school, so like having a date every weekend was like whatever. And
Yes.
I tend to be a pretty encouraging person, so to look at me and say, it's your job as, a sister in the church.
Yes.
It's your job to encourage the brothers to not lust after other women by
Ugh.
going out with them on Saturday nights, so that they're
Oh my
like,
gosh.
yeah. So, I was like, okay, and I'll give them cards and I'll make them Rice Krispie treats or whatever. So,
Like a good woman should, and I'm being facetious. That does not make you necessarily a good woman.
no,
Um, so that's interesting. I don't I really dislike that it was the woman's job to, help the men not lust. How about we teach the men not to lust
right?
after the
Like, could we
women?
teach the guys to have self control instead of making it my job to be the Holy Spirit in your life? Like, that's not my
Yeah,
job.
seriously. And really, that puts a lot of shame and blame and all those things on.
Yeah.
I'm sensing that that's sort of the plan. We want
Yeah.
to have that layer of shame going so that you don't want to leave and you don't want to speak out or anything like that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
So they were keeping you busy most
so
days.
we were so busy, like part of what they excel at is isolating people.
Okay.
So by the time I had been in for a year, I had none of my previous friends. Like
Oh,
I had broken ties with basically everybody that I had been close to in high school, any friends that I had made in college before joining this group.
mm-hmm.
Because one, you were just so busy. Like you didn't have time to like be a college student, work
Right.
part-time, um, keep
Yeah.
up your friendships, plus do all of these other
Yeah.
things. Um, and you were supposed to be inviting like a certain number of people to church every day and
Oh my gosh.
studying the Bible with a certain number of people every week and having a certain number of people coming to church with you. And so like when were you supposed to, maintain actual relationships with anybody outside of the church?
Right.
So very, very isolating.
Wow.
Um, and on top of that, like the belief that you are part of the only church whose members go to heaven
Mm-hmm.
is very isolating. Like
Right.
it's not like you could go to a campus crusade meeting and hang out with all the other Christians on campus because you didn't believe they were actually Christians. It's
Oh.
not like I could go to church with my parents because I had already told them they were going to hell for not being part of this crazy church.
Oh, okay.
So like
Right.
now these are the only people in my life. So if I leave, not only am I going to hell, I'm
Right.
losing everyone. I'm losing my place to live. I'm losing all
Yeah.
my friends. I'm like,
Wow.
what do you do? And so
Right.
you're just like, you're trapped in this
Mm-hmm.
huge, like, mess. And it seems impossible to get out of.
Right. Oh my gosh. That is really scary.
Yeah.
And it all sounds like it's by design, so that you wouldn't go. And I would imagine not being able to speak to other people keeps you from sharing, oh, I have a concern, or I think
Yeah.
this is weird, or whatever,
Yeah.
because if you're talking to other people, then they might say, yeah, that is strange, or
Right.
and you can't, and quote unquote, you're not supposed to trust anyone else, right?
Right.
And what their opinion on how you're living your life, because they don't know, kind of
Right.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what
Yeah.
you're being told. So that's kind of scary. So
Yeah. To the point that, like, when I moved out of town, I was living like 12 hours away from my family. When I would come back,
Mhm.
I wasn't allowed to come by myself
Oh.
because then I would be on my own. My parents didn't belong to that group. So I
Oh
would have
gosh.
too much freedom to like think for myself, to be by myself, to not be so run ragged with the schedule, to not be so isolated from other thought processes and opinions and
Right.
perspectives. And so like how awkward. I'm like 22 years old. I'm not
Yeah.
allowed to go see my parents on my own. I have to have one of my roommates come with me.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even get to grow up. And I think that was one of the hardest things.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I joined as a freshman in college and I didn't leave until after I got married.
Yeah.
And so there was a whole like maturation process
Yeah.
that I missed out on and
Right.
had to go back and like
Yeah.
intentionally discover after I left
Right.
because it was like truncated.
That is so interesting because I think it's, they talk a lot, therapists talk a lot about like, healing your inner child and
Mhm.
those kinds of things. But there are parts, like you said, of our past that you say, I just want to go back and do that again, or I want to go have fun, the fun I missed, and those kinds of things. And you may not want to live there forever, but you may want to go try those things out and whatever that looks like to you. So
Yeah.
these are ways that did you feel like you were kind of abandoning yourself at this point? Because were you seeing some of these things as red flags? I know you sound irritated now that you had to have a roommate with you to travel with you to see your parents. But at that time, was that starting to seem unusual? Was that starting to seem like a red flag at that time?
I mean, probably not. Like
Okay.
I don't I it was just normal. Like I didn't know any different.
Oh,
You know
right.
what I mean? Like
Right.
I was in I was in high school and so I was living with my parents and then I was a freshman in college and joined this group and so
Yeah.
like I had never lived on my own. I had never traveled on
Yeah.
my own. I had never, you know.
Right. So it didn't
So
seem unusual. And
it
then
didn't seem like completely strange to me. I
I-
did have moments where I was like, this is crazy and I don't like it. Like, I don't want to stay here. And I
oh,
would go, I lived at that point, I lived close enough to my parents that I would go for like dinner or something. And I would just like
ooh,
unload on my mom. Like, I
oh,
hate it. They're crazy. Like,
right.
why are they doing it? And my mom would be like, why are you staying? And I'm like, I can't leave.
Yeah.
Which had to have been,
Hard
so
for them.
horrible for my mom. Like,
Yeah. And
my
you still
mom,
felt that. You still felt that you couldn't leave.
yeah, I still felt that. Even when they would like say like they would do and say really hurtful things to me that made me feel like I didn't matter. Like
Yeah.
they have what they call discipling partners. And it's for like accountability and spiritual mentoring.
Okay.
Um and so you reach a certain point where there's like somebody above you and then you're probably discipling somebody else. So there's like, you know, whatever. Um and I had been there for a while at this point, like maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and there was a girl who had really just joined. She was very new, um, but she was sharp. That was like the buzzword. Like, oh,
Oh, okay.
she's sharp, and so she fit the mold of what they wanted leaders,
Yeah.
to be. And so they put her in charge of like a Bible group, like overseeing a bunch of the women in the Bible group. And they were like, so Amanda, she's gonna disciple you because it was a sign. She's gonna disciple you because we know that like she needs this like encouragement and boost so that she believes she can do this.
Oh
And
my
we
gosh.
trust that you'll be okay, even if she's not great at it at first.
Oh,
And I was like,
gaslight much?
so she's supposed to be my spiritual mentor, and advice is definitely not just advice, it is permission. But she's only been here for like 3 months, and you're pretty sure she's not going to do a great job, but I'm just supposed to be okay with that. Like,
Oh my gosh.
it was so frustrating. And that's actually one of the times I went back to my mom's and I was like,
Yeah. Well, because you thought they just accept me and everything, right? And that's starting to feel like I don't
But now
feel
I started to feel like I was just being used.
okay. I have to
Like,
ask, I wanted to ask about when this thought came to my head when you were talking about the traveling and stuff.
yeah.
Other people around you, right, in all these situations are doing all these things as well, and they're not complaining necessarily about it. Like you probably wouldn't complain, I would guess, on campus or like in your dorm kind of thing or your apartment. Was there any of that?
No, no. So I don't know how to explain this. Like, you know how when you read books about people who are in prison
Okay.
and like there's always that one person that you're like sharing a cell with and you say too much and they go straight to the police to cut a deal.
Okay.
That's what it was like. If you said the wrong
Oh.
thing to the wrong person, they would go straight to leadership because it made them look spiritual. Because if you went to a leader and you said,
Oh.
so and so is struggling and we need to do something, then you looked spiritual. And so then like
Wow.
you were raised in their eyes as the person who talked to you was lowered in their eyes. So it was like this like power grab to be able to go to leaders and say so and so struggling. She said blah blah blah. Um so yeah, no, you didn't trust other people in the
Okay.
group.
So then you are living in a world where no one is complaining. So that's why it's easy to
Mhm.
go, well, I guess I'm supposed to take a roommate with me on my trip back home because that's what you're supposed to do. And
Right.
there's not anybody else going, well, I think it's dumb. No, there's nobody
No,
doing that. No, because you
no.
wouldn't want to be in that situation that you were in. Okay.
Right.
So, oh my gosh. So
You
continue.
wouldn't want to look unspiritual.
Oh, exactly. Yes, I can totally look, I get this. Like in I think there's lots of these little things like this. In many ways, we abandon ourselves in the
Yeah.
work we do, maybe in the church we're in or whatever. And it's not necessarily that we ended up in a cult, but we do. We maybe make compromises we shouldn't have made,
Yeah.
you know, just because we don't want to leave the situation or we don't want to, like that, look unspiritual or whatever the
Right.
situation is, or get
The
in
thing
trouble.
is that like lots of little compromises over time result in you not even knowing who you are anymore.
Yes,
like,
amen. Amen. That is for
like
darn
when I
sure.
left, I was like, people would say, "What do you like to do for fun?" And I was like, "I don't know."
I have no idea.
Have you
I
seen that movie Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts?
yes,
And
yes,
she has to try all the different kinds of eggs because she had always
yes,
just liked whatever the man she was with liked at the time. That's
yes.
how I felt when I left. I was like, I don't know what I like to do for fun because all I've ever done for the past 6 years is what I was told to do.
Wow.
And I didn't have time for the things that I actually thought was fun. Like sitting down and reading a book was considered essential, unless it was a spiritual book written by somebody in the group.
Oh
It was
my
considered
gosh.
a waste of time and sinful. Sitting down and like I love to knit, sitting down and spending 3 hours knitting something,
That
like
was
you
not a
could
good
have been
use.
sharing your faith at Kroger, you
Oh
know,
my gosh.
unless maybe you were, stuck at home for some reason and you were knitting for somebody in need. Like
Yes.
there were qualifiers. You couldn't do anything that like you just genuinely enjoyed
Right.
because it was essentially sinful.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. So let's let's move into how you met your first husband. I'm very sorry.
No, it's okay. So
It's all part of the story. You guys got to go to YouTube and see her face. You're not the only one who's done that. I've talked to lots of people with first husbands.
so I was at a funeral this week and I was there with a lot of people who knew my first husband. And my dad was with me and he's like, "Oh, old Michael." And I'm like, "Right, because don't marry two people with the same first name.
Oh
It's
my
so
gosh.
confusing."
That's hilarious. Well, you'll have to tell my ex-husband that because that's not what he's
There,
doing.
oh my goodness, it's a bad idea. Like, just
We're
let's
gonna
put
have
it
the
out
same.
there. It's a
We're
bad
just
idea.
we're gonna have the same name. That'll be fun.
So confusing. So, um, I met my ex-husband. So I had moved away from my family.
Okay.
I was living in Virginia. Um, Somebody that I knew from Ohio who was now in Virginia was going to be my roommate. And she was like, I have this guy for you. And I was like, meh, I'm over men.
Okay.
Like, it's just going to be me and God. I was so definite about this.
Mm-hmm. And kind of dumb question, but was this somebody from the church
Yes.
that was recommending
yes.
the crazy church, we'll call it?
Yes. Because I mean, I was going to be living with her. It was her and like 5 other women. We were sharing this Victorian house.
Okay.
So she's like, I have this guy for you. I'm like, whatever. I'm done. I had just gotten out of a really bizarre, like, we called them weasel relationships, where you weren't like given the red stamp to date, but you were basically dating somebody. But he lived in Ohio and he lived in Hawaii and I lived in Virginia.
Okay.
So like, we never met face to face. Anyway.
Okay.
So I was done with men and I moved to Virginia and she's like, I got this man for you. And I was like, no. So okay, let me rewind for a second because I need to explain
Yes.
that I was done with men because I had been in 2 or 3 relationships by that point where our disciplers had gotten involved because starting to date with the intention of getting married was something that you had to get advice / permission for.
Okay.
And so our disciplers had started talking like, is this what you want? Would you move there? What are you thinking? And one of them didn't work out, but he stayed in the group. 2 of them though, like right as we were getting to the point of, yes, I would move to Texas to be with this man.
Yeah.
They all ended up in Texas.
Jeez.
I don't know what it is about Texas. So they would get to Texas and they would be like, yeah, but I don't want to stay in the church.
Oh.
And I was like, well, then I can't be with you.
Right.
So I felt like I just needed a break. Like I didn't, and like at the very, very heart of that issue, I felt like I wasn't worth staying for.
Oh, okay.
It should have been like, is God not worth staying for? But like I was not in that place at that point. I was like,
right.
Just like, can we just get together before you leave? Like, can we just make this happen?
Right.
And I just felt like I wasn't worth it. I had a lot of health issues. I still do, but they were unknown at that point. I was going through testing for like lupus and MS and rheumatoid arthritis and other things like that were much scarier and much more like short time span here on earth kind of things. And we didn't know what was going on. And so like I had all this stuff going on in my head where it was like, you know, I could be dying. We don't know. I'm a huge burden. I will probably never be able to work full time. Like, who wants to be with that? I'm sick. I'm, you know, whatever. Like, I had all this stuff going on. So then here comes along this guy, and he was so broken. Like, so broken. He had the most horrific childhood. Like, his mom was murdered in front of him. He was stabbed like 3 dozen times in the process of his mom being killed. He was raised by an extremely abusive father.
And why did your friend think that
right?
You would be
I don't
good.
know. Like I should have that conversation. But anyway,
Because you're a fixer. I don't know. Is that what, maybe that was the vibe?
I mean, I am a fixer, and that was part of it. Like I felt um like I felt like I was uniquely qualified to be his partner in life because I understood, I could walk with him through this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Right.
so I went from feeling like no one will ever want me
Yeah.
to I can help,
Right.
which was huge. That was huge, right? So when we talk about like how you get into these situations that
Yeah.
aren't healthy for you,
Right.
you're getting something out of it too. I was getting something out of it,
Yes.
right?
You're so
That's
right.
why we stay in unhealthy situations.
Yes.
Even the wife, battered abuse syndrome, who is staying in
Mm-hmm.
a horrible situation. And this is going to sound harsh, and please, I don't mean this. If this is you, I don't mean it to sound harsh,
Uh-huh.
but maybe you're scared because you don't know where you're going to go, or you don't know
Right.
how you would pay rent, or
Right.
you're afraid you would lose your kids. It's not always something enjoyable that we're getting out of it.
Right.
Sometimes it's that we're scared of what we would have to do if we left,
Yeah.
and that's what we're getting out of it. We don't have to do the big scary thing if we stay, or
Right.
we don't know how, but
Right.
that's still what we're getting out of it. And
Right.
so I was getting something out of that relationship. I felt like
Right.
I could help him. I felt
Right.
like I could fix him.
Right.
Um and just to be honest, like numerous people told me that he could not lead me spiritually, and I think that part of me was like, okay, like
Right.
that means I can, I'm the spiritual one. I can be in control. I don't, if he's not like, there's so much baggage from stuff like this, but like
Right.
when you're taught that level of submission from a
Mhm.
church,
Yeah.
when you can like kind of low key feel like you don't have to submit because he's not as spiritual as you,
Yeah.
there was a little bit of freedom in that.
Right.
Um, and so that's not healthy, just putting that out there. But like
Good.
that's where I was at. And
That's
so
right.
I ended up with this guy because I felt like I didn't have anything to offer. And then he was like broken, and I thought maybe I did have something to offer.
Yep.
But on top of that, like he was willing to put up with what I was going through and what I had going on in my life. And
Right.
that would come back to bite me later, where he would say things like, nobody else would want to be with you because blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Um, but in that moment, it felt like an answered prayer,
Mm-hmm.
honestly,
Mm-hmm.
because who else was I going to be with? How was I going to get out of the crazy singles housing where it was like me and six other women in a house, or like, like just the singles ministry in this particular group it's kind of like the kiss of death. If you don't get married before you get out of the campus ministry, it can be very, very difficult
Oh, wow.
to get married. Um, so there I was, and we got married. Within the first 2 weeks of our marriage, I found him. There was like a little room right off of our bedroom that we used as an office, and he was out there on our computer looking at porn. Um,
And you didn't
and I
suspect,
just
and you didn't really suspect anything before,
no,
or okay.
no,
Okay.
no. Um, and so I was devastated. I had struggled with body image issues my entire life. I was literally in the best shape of my life. Like,
Yeah.
I don't say this about myself often, but I looked good then. Like,
Uh-huh.
I looked good, and I felt like, well, guess it's not enough.
Right.
And so broke something inside of me, and
You still
I
blamed you
still,
still blamed yourself. You're still
no, it was
blaming yourself.
totally my fault. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't enough
Yeah. If you I
somehow.
know I've heard things from other people who have been told when their husbands are in that, you know, if you would give him more sex, or if you were sexier, or if you were doing things, then he
If you were
wouldn't be
more adventurous in bed, or,
right. All those
you know,
things.
and it's
Then
just,
no,
no,
that's no,
it's not.
no,
It's,
it's not our job.
it took me at least 12 years to realize that it was his problem, not mine.
Wow.
Like, to really understand that, and
Right.
not just like pay it lip service, but to like really understand that. And sometimes I still struggle with it.
Yeah.
But to really understand that that was something that was broken inside of him, and no matter what,
Right.
he
He
would have
has
he
yeah,
would
he
have
has
done
to
that.
yeah, he has to be the one who's dealing
Yeah.
with that problem.
Yeah, that was him.
Were you able to talk to anybody at all about that?
Not really.
Yeah. I can't even imagine like who you would have
um
spoken to. Maybe your parents, but you know, like I can't imagine anyone in the church would have been really helpful, or that it would have
Not
been
really.
safe, or that it would have been safe to talk to them.
No. So there's a lot of stigma associated with sexual sin in the church.
Okay.
um and so if we had talked to somebody about it and been open about it, um it would have been a very big deal.
Okay.
And we would have gotten the whole like, well, you just need to be available whenever he wants you, or
Right.
whatever. Chances are good he would have had to go like on stage and
Oh, okay.
like confess his
Confess
sins to the
it.
church,
Oh,
and like,
okay.
so as all of that was going on, my health was crazy. I was on meds that weren't working, so I was in a very dark place
Mhm.
anyway.
Mhm.
um like, calling the people who were leading my Bible talk and discipling me and leaving messages like, I think I'm just going to go lay in the middle of the street and wait for a car to hit me. Like, I was just in
Wow.
a very, very bad place.
Right.
Um, and they weren't responding
Oh my gosh.
at all. Like, no callback, no concern, just
Wow.
radio silence. And so at the same time all of this was going on, there was like a shakeup happening in the group. A guy who was very, very, very influential and high in leadership wrote a letter, detailing what he described as the systemic abuses within the church,
Wow.
the problems that were just pervasive because of the system that
Mhm.
was implemented in every single church, because
Of this
they're all over the world.
okay, of this particular
Yeah,
yeah, this
this yeah.
particular wow.
So I was, it got leaked, and it ended up on, back in the early 2000s, it was Delphi forums. That's where we went for all of our
Okay. I
information. It was like,
remember all the forums.
right, it was like if it got posted on Facebook now,
Right.
like, and then you would go into a group and you would talk about it with all the people who were,
Yes,
like,
exactly.
so it was that kind of situation where it got leaked on, the brand new interwebs. And
Right.
like, so it, I'd already had questions. Then this letter came out. I was in a dark place, and I wasn't able to get to church because my health had just tanked after our
Mhm.
wedding. So because of everything that was going on, like, my husband was, doing what he was doing, and
Mhm.
it was a really bad, really, really bad time. So my ex went to Bible talk, like our small group that week,
Okay.
and without me because I wasn't feeling well. And it was only guys, and he didn't know that it was going to be only guys. And so he walked in, and they ganged up on him. I don't know how else to put it. Like,
Oh,
essentially told him that he needed to man up and lead me spiritually, and he needed to find a way to get me to church on Sunday, or they were taking me off the leadership, not the leadership, off the membership list.
wow.
And he was like, she's sick. Like, I can't make her go to church. Like, she can barely get out of bed. And they were
Right.
like, no, like, you're her spiritual leader. It is your job to get her to
Oh
church.
my gosh.
So he came home and told me all of this. And I was like, wow, like, that's a lot. Where were the wives? And he was like, they were visiting someone who was sick. And
Oh, wow.
I was like, you know what? I'm done.
That sounds suspicious. And also, you were sick too. So, like, and where was your visit? But also, that's very suspicious that all
Right.
the wives are not there
Right. Exactly.
so that they could talk to him. That's so,
Yeah.
oh my
Exactly.
gosh. Okay, so you
So
said
like
you were done. Okay, that's
I
interesting.
I was done. Like, there was just so much happening at that time. Like, the leadership of the church had said, okay, we're not going to assign your disciplers anymore. You can pick somebody that you feel like would be really great to be your spiritual mentor. And we were so excited because discipling was like a whole huge thing. Like, you were assigned a discipler, it could change at any moment. You
Oh,
had to immediately be completely transparent and like open with them,
geez.
confess all of your sins. Like, there was no, oh, give yourself time to get to know her so that you feel comfortable and you feel safe sharing these, like, your deepest darkest secrets. It was like, no, like, you have to immediately share all of your stuff and all of your junk.
Jeez.
It didn't stay with people. Like, I was at leadership meetings, those things got talked about and shared. And like,
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever heard the term holy gossip, but like, those moments where you're like, oh, we should pray for so and so, they're
Right.
struggling with, like, so it sounds spiritual, but really all
Yes,
you're doing is
but you're doing
gossiping
is
about somebody.
gossiping. Yes.
And so, like, that happened all the time. And so you're told you have to immediately trust this person and share all your junk with them, but then they go to a leaders meeting, or to their discipler who goes to their discipler who goes to their discipler,
Oh.
to get advice on how to deal with the sin in your life.
Oh my
And so, like,
gosh.
everybody knew about it.
Oh my gosh.
So we were so excited at the prospect of being able to pick our own discipler, somebody
Yeah.
that we trusted, somebody that we knew would actually care about us, not just
Mhm.
looking good for the leaders. There was another couple in the church. She had chronic health issues. They had been married for a while, and we thought, this will be amazing.
Right.
Like, 2 weeks later, the leadership announced that they were going to start assigning discipling partners again.
Oh
And
my
so,
gosh.
because I was not a good submissive wife and thought I was more spiritual than my husband, which I was, but whatever. Uh,
Just saying.
hot mess. Just saying. I'm just putting that out there. That was horrible. I'm a horrible person, you guys. So anyway,
No.
I sent an email to the pastor of our church, who wasn't just the pastor of our church. He was a very, very, very high up leader in this
Okay.
group. He oversaw the churches of numerous states in the
Okay.
United States. And I said, I I thought that we weren't doing assigned disciplers anymore. I thought that, we
Right.
had seen the error of that and we were moving away from that. And he was like, well, we have decided that we are going back to that. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should find another church.
Oh my
Now,
gosh.
if you remember, these people believe they are the only church whose members
Hmm.
are going to heaven. So
Oh,
essentially, this leader just told me,
tell me to go
go
to
to hell.
hell. my
So
gosh,
I was
it's
like,
terrible.
okay, so all of this is happening at the exact same time. And first of all, when God has to do that much to get your attention,
Yes. Pay attention.
pay attention, my friend. Don't make him do anything more drastic.
Right, seriously.
So, so by that point, by the time my ex-husband came home and was like, all the women were visiting somebody who was sick, I'm like, I am so done with these people in this church.
That's
We were renting a
amazing.
house from a member. So we had to move. They were threatening to evict us
Oh, of course, because
because
you're
we
no
left.
longer, yeah, because you're not going to be part of the church. Oh my
Right.
gosh.
And so my parents, who I had told were going to hell, who I had, you know,
Oh, yes.
essentially cut out of my life, in what is probably the most prodigal son like story ever,
Yeah.
were like, come home, just
Oh,
come home. They
oh,
paid for our truck. They let us live with them until we could
wow.
get on our feet. They helped us get into our apartment. Like they made it possible
Yeah.
for us to leave. Um, and I think if I could say anything to family members
Mm-hmm.
who's, who are dealing with somebody who's in a situation like this, it would be, don't give up.
Yeah.
Like, don't completely cut ties.
Yes.
Be there, listen, be available. When they need help, then you can step in.
Yeah.
If you're constantly, like my parents in the beginning, they were constantly, like I said, they cut me off, they tried to deprogram me, they were very
Right.
negative about it, and all it did was push me further in. But later on, after I moved states away
Yeah.
and we had more distance, they could just be there for me. They could be excited
Mm-hmm.
when they saw me. They could, take my phone calls, and I would talk with my mom all the time. And so we were able to start rebuilding
Yeah.
without my parents constantly like belittling what I was doing and telling me that I was wrong.
Right.
Because even if you're not in a cult,
Yeah.
that tends to push people further into what they're doing.
Right. Right.
People will dig in and they will be obstinate and they will want to
Mm-hmm.
prove you wrong.
Right.
And so if you tell people, like if you get in their face and like you're like, you are in a cult and you need to leave,
Mm-hmm.
chances are good that's not going to work unless they're already at a point
Right.
where they're ready to hear that. But my parents did an amazing job of just being there and being willing
Yeah.
to step in and help when I needed it. There was no recrimination. I didn't feel judgment from them. I didn't
Right.
feel like they were, I didn't feel like a burden or an imposition or like they had to rescue me. I just felt like they wanted me to come home. They just
Wow.
wanted me to come home, and I was welcome to do that. And
That's
so
amazing.
I was able to leave. I think if we had called my parents and they had been like, this is what you get,
Right.
I wouldn't have left.
Oh,
Where would I have gone?
right. Because you were so far in it.
We had cut everybody else off.
Wow.
And I couldn't go to my ex-husband's family. They were crazy.
Okay. Yeah.
Like his dad was so abusive and he was like
Right. Wow.
crazy. So, you know, if they had not been open to helping and,
Yeah.
willing to do so without the I told you so's that could so easily have come, like they
Oh
had
God.
every right to say, we told you not to do this. Look
Right.
at what happened. And they chose not to. They chose to just support me and love me and welcome me home and do everything that they could to
Yeah.
make that an easy transition.
That's amazing.
It yeah, they're they are incredible.
That's really encouraging though for you to be telling people, don't give up that way. Because I think the other key point too is also the not holding it against you thing, like remember when you
Yeah.
said all these terrible things and we already tried getting you out and all this stuff, and it's like what
Right.
those shoulda coulda wouldas, those things don't help. Holding those things against people,
Yeah.
of course, if you walked into your parents' house and then you were abusive to them, that's different. But they
Right.
were just like, come home and we will figure this out. And
Yes.
that's all you need. You don't need to know all the plan, the steps. Just come home and we'll figure it out. Is the plan.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was incredible. I
So how
know
did
that there's oh, go ahead.
no, no, you go ahead.
I know that there's still like my mom especially,
Yeah.
it was very, very, very hard for her
Oh,
when
okay.
I joined and stayed. And when I would come home and say, like, I hate it, I want to leave, but then I
Yeah,
wouldn't.
right.
Um,
Yeah, as a mom, you can totally relate to that.
right. Yeah. But she still like she just wanted me home.
Right. Well, she wasn't going to give up. She wasn't going to cut you off.
No.
So, what happened with your husband, your first husband? What happened with him when you guys moved in? How did that all go?
So in the beginning, I think my family liked him
Okay.
ish.
Okay. Because he was yours, so they tried to like him.
Yeah, maybe that might have been it. Um, so when when people are pretending to be something that they're not,
Yeah.
whether they're just horrible people or they
Hmm.
have a legitimate personality disorder,
Yeah.
like a narcissist or a sociopath,
Right.
whatever. Um, you can only pretend for so long
Yeah.
before there are cracks that start to show.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've experienced this, but as a wife, I felt like it was my job to spackle over the cracks,
Oh, yes, for sure. I protected him for a lot of years because
right?
my kids did not know who he was. When we were divorced and I wasn't in the picture, when I was taking a break on social media and they were meeting his new girlfriend and whatever, they didn't even know who he was as a person because I had always protected him. And they were like, "We don't even know this guy."
Yeah.
Like they don't know. Yeah, it's like they drop a new person. As soon as we got divorced, and God was like, "Here's a new person you got to deal with."
Yeah, exactly. So,
So, yeah, there's only so much you can do to cover the
yeah.
cracks.
So I spent a lot of years covering cracks and um suffering in silence and not
Yeah,
not sharing what was going on.
right.
Um he was in the Navy when we met and he stayed in the reserves
Okay.
and he got deployed and so he went to the Middle East. I can't remember where. He went to the Middle East somewhere.
Okay.
And I mean, we had issues like I mean, obviously he was on the computer 2 weeks after we got married. We had
Right.
issues. He had issues that were like causing issues in our marriage.
Right.
Might have been a better way to put it.
Right.
Um, and so we were in counseling all the time. I feel like we would do a round of counseling and there would be all these promises that it was never going to happen again. And then like 2 months later, it was happening again. And um, he would cry and it would be like this whole big production. And then I would be comforting him.
Wow.
And somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd be like, aren't I the hurt party here? But
Yeah.
like I was still always taking care of him and like comforting him and trying to make him feel better about
Yeah.
it. And like,
Yeah.
you can do this, you can get through this, we're gonna be fine. And I wasn't telling anybody because
Well,
like,
there's a lot of shame around that.
what,
Around,
yeah, what are you gonna do?
right.
And still like that whole, well, if you would just be a better wife.
Oh my gosh.
um and I'm not sure that the people around me at that time in my life would have said that, but it was so deeply ingrained in me by that point
Yes, of course.
that I just felt like I can't, like, this is just something that people deal with.
Yeah.
And so he got deployed. Let me explain something really quick though. When we left the, what I affectionately refer to as the crazy cult, when we
Right.
left the crazy cult, I didn't go to church for like 5 years.
Oh, I'm sure.
I was confused. I was hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I had done everything the way that I was supposed to do.
Yes.
And like,
And then you had
this is
nothing.
what I got. Like,
Right.
my life was not great. Um,
Wow.
and I was really mad at God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in hindsight, there were red flags. I'm
Right.
pretty sure God was like warning me.
Right.
Like there were things. And I had, I believe we have free will. I believe that God
Yeah.
gives us free will.
Yep.
Without it, we can't choose to love him. Like there's all
Right.
these like
Yes.
theological things that go into that, but I believe we make our own choices. I think that
Yeah.
God can use those.
Yes.
Even our bad choices, he can use and redeem and work together for our good. That's what scripture says.
Right.
But I, like I said before, I made choices because of what I thought I was going to get out of that relationship.
Right.
Because I felt like nobody else would want me, because I thought I could help fix this broken man, because
Right.
I wanted security. I didn't want to be one of those 40-year-old singles who were stuck in
Yep.
the dead zone of the singles ministry.
Yep.
There was all this stuff like that I was getting out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to take responsibility for that choice. I couldn't keep blaming God for that.
Right.
So my ex-husband, deployed to the Middle East, and while he was gone, I decided to join our local church.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know why. It's really good ish that I did. Like, there's a lot that goes into that, but so I joined the church and then found out that he was cheating on me.
Oh,
um
jeez.
so he was never great about passwords, and I didn't trust him because of everything we had gone through. So I logged on. I'm not even sure I was being snoopy at that point. I think that I was like looking for a bill that went to his email. So I log on to his email, and um all of a sudden the messenger starts dinging,
Oh.
and it was a woman. And I messaged her back and I was like, I'm not who you think I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the wife. And she
Wow.
was like, the what? And I was
There's
like,
a wife.
I'm the wife.
Oh my gosh.
And like, he was in this relationship with this single mom. I think she lived in
Mm.
Texas, ironically enough.
Right.
But she believed he was going to come back from the Middle East and he was going to move in with her and her
Oh
kids, and they
my
were going to have a happy
gosh.
family. And I mean, they were doing stuff like, there was stuff going
Yeah.
on camera, and like,
Oh
it was
my
just,
god.
it was horrible. It was horrible. It was horrible for me. It was horrible for her,
Yeah.
um for her kids. Like, it was just awful. So I decided I was going to leave him, but I just joined this church, and the crazy cult didn't allow divorce. Like if you got divorced, essentially you were told to leave. Like you just had to suck it up
Oh
if
my
you were
gosh.
in the crazy cult and in a horrible marriage. Um,
Right.
and so I went to the woman who oversaw like the women's stuff, and I was like, hey, I just joined, but I think I'm leaving my husband. Am I allowed to still come to this church? And she was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly where you need to be.
Wow.
Like it so it was so eye-opening for me, because I felt like surely they're going to say,
Mm-hmm.
nope, like this is not the place for you.
Wow.
And so she asked if she could get together with me and one of the elders to pray. And I didn't know this particular gentleman, but I was like, sure, whatever. We got together to pray, and I was so angry at my ex-husband at that point. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just so angry. So here's this elder, he's praying, and he looks at me and he says, have you prayed for him? And I was like, no, because he's a cheating, lying dirtbag.
Oh my.
So I probably didn't use those words, but that's what he was. And
Right. And you can say whatever you want.
and he's like, well, you believe that marriage means that you become one, and you also believe that his salvation is in jeopardy.
Oh
So, and
my.
I was like, oh my gosh, like, how are you putting that on me? Like, are you now
Oh
telling
my
me that like
gosh.
his salvation is my responsibility because we're married?
And here we're going back to free will. He had a choice to
He
do.
had free will.
He had free will.
So I stayed, which was not a great choice, but I stayed. And one of the
Okay.
things that I did during that time was I started working on me.
Okay.
I would suggest to anyone who is in a relationship um, with somebody who's toxic, if you are in a relationship where you're like, we really need counseling,
Yeah.
but what you really mean is we need counseling so you can change,
Yeah.
go get counseling for yourself. Not
Yes.
because you're a bad person or you're whatever, but because I had to learn what was his and what was mine.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yes.
And that helped me. And I think if we had only ever done couples counseling,
Yes.
the focus would have always been on what can we do to help him overcome this thing.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And
Yeah.
depending on who your counselor is and the background that they come from and the type of
Yes.
counseling that they do,
Yeah.
you may end up with someone like I did, where they look at you and say, well, what were you doing or not doing that would cause your husband to be unfaithful?
Oh my gosh. Yes. And unfortunately, I have heard that sadly. That's why you have to keep doing well. I watch a lot of things on YouTube, but I also have had terrible counselors and I've had some really good ones. You just have to keep searching for them. They're out
Yeah,
there. They're out
I
there.
didn't know that at the time. I
Right,
didn't
of
know that you
course.
were allowed to fire your counselor.
Oh,
But
okay.
please, friends, please hear me.
Yes.
You are allowed to fire your counselor. They work for you. If
Right.
it's not working for you, find someone else. That
Right.
doesn't mean go find someone who only tells you what you want to hear. That's not
Yes.
helpful.
No.
But find somebody who's for you, who is for you.
And it's going to give you things to help you or work on or even say
Yes.
to you, not those kinds of things. Because if we believe, if, like you said, you had to figure out what was your responsibility, what was his responsibility. And if you're only being told, what did you do wrong to cause him to do that?
Then
That
it's all my
and it's
responsibility.
all and that doesn't make sense. We have no control over any human being in this entire universe. So
No.
there is nothing. We have to work on ourselves. That's all I've been doing. That's all. I mean, it's very, and it doesn't have to be traditional therapy if people start, if people aren't comfortable with that. There are so many other things. There's holistic therapy. There's lots of things. And
There are groups you can go to: grief share, divorce share,
yes, and
celebrate recovery. There, you know,
And
there's
we've
all
talked
kinds
about
of stuff.
those. Yeah, we've talked about those. And not only that, but even if you start on YouTube, because even being like,
Yeah.
how do I better myself or whatever, follow
Listen
some,
to podcasts.
yes,
Like,
follow some good people, Mel Robbins, I mean, Caroline Leaf. There's a million of them who work
yeah.
on, they work on things for your brain. They work on bettering yourself so that you know what's sort of what's right from wrong, because
Yeah.
we can get so caught up in our life. And like you said, if you're only in, say, marriage counseling, then and most marriage counselors will encourage each of you to go to
Yes.
counseling. I've had
Yes.
I've had lots of them who have, and my ex never did, which that's a red flag too. At some point, if they never want to go, why not? And he told me it's because he didn't have anything to work on. Another red flag. And so, those kinds of things. Okay, you might work yourself. I therapied my way out of my marriage. That's what happened because I realized who he was. But that's not to say that's what you should do, and that's not what therapy is going to do. Therapy is is there to help you. That's what it's meant
Right.
to do.
Yes. Yes. And if what will help you most is not being in that marriage anymore, that's
Yep.
okay.
Yes.
But if being there, like if you're both willing to work on it, if you're both
Yes.
willing to put in the time and the effort, if that's what you both want, then absolutely go for it.
Right.
But what I learned in the end was I could have been the best wife ever. I
Uh-huh.
could have kept the house spotless. I could have had sex with him anytime he said. I could have been
Right.
completely submissive, whatever that looks like.
Right.
Um, he would still have done that
Right. It was
because
his
that was
choice.
his issue.
It
It
was
wasn't
his.
mine.
Right. Exactly.
Now, are there things that I did wrong?
Hmm.
Were there things I needed to work on? Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. But to look at somebody and say, like, well,
What
what
did?
did you do wrong?
Right.
That's not helpful.
It is not.
Um, so we stayed together though. We stayed together for like another 6 years.
Oh my goodness.
So after that whole first situation happened where he was deployed, he came back and we started getting involved in church and um back in the early mid, I don't know, I lost track of time, like the 2010 time
Okay.
period, something called cardboard testimonies was very popular.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't
What
know
is
if you
that?
remember that.
No. What is that?
So it he would take like a piece of cardboard
Okay.
at church. It was usually done at church as like an offering or a communion song or something. And people would write like a very short phrase on the cardboard and do their cardboard testimony.
Okay.
Like, I was addicted to porn was his.
Oh, okay.
Or um I'm not the sick girl anymore, I think was mine. Like I had
Okay.
finally learned to not wear a mask all the time.
Okay.
That it was okay when people asked me how I was doing to say I'm having a really bad day instead of being
Oh,
like,
okay.
I'm great, how are you?
Okay.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And
Yeah.
so these cardboard testimonies were like a big deal then. And my ex-husband went up and he did one. And so like everybody in the entire church, plus anybody who saw it on YouTube, knew that that's what he had struggled with,
Okay.
which was like a whole thing. But anyway, um, so when he came to me and said, God has told me to go back to Kuwait, I was like, no, he didn't. And he was like, no, yes, he did. And I was like, well, that's funny because he didn't tell me. And I'm pretty sure he wouldn't tell you if he didn't tell me to. And he was like, nope, he told me. And I need to go to prove to myself and God and everyone else that I can be a man of integrity and go overseas and not do what I did the last time. And I was like,
Wow. Oh my gosh.
so everyone in our life was like, bro, nah, this is a bad idea.
Oh my gosh.
But he went anyway. And he did the exact same thing.
Oh my gosh.
So, um, this time he was not actually deployed with the reserves. He had gone as a contractor for the
Okay.
company that he was working for. And so I was like, you have a choice. You can either come home now or you can come home when you're done. But if you come home when you're done,
Yeah.
I won't be here.
Right.
So he came home, which meant he quit his job.
Mm-hmm.
We lost all of our income. We lost all of our, like, we lost everything. We lost our house. We went through bankruptcy, like, all because of what he was doing.
And did he say he was going to stop doing that when he got back? Like, and is
I
that what you
mean,
expected?
like, we went through the exact same thing. It was like the exact same cycle, like
Okay.
tears, and I'm so sorry, and I'm a horrible person, and I'm never gonna do it again, blah blah blah.
Okay.
So, um, we moved again. We lost our house where we were living like 10 minutes from my parents. We lost that house. So we moved 4 hours away to be with the family that he was completely estranged from.
Oh no.
So we had nobody, like no support. We found an amazing church there that we absolutely loved.
Mm-hmm.
And um, the first day I was there, I am such an introvert. Like it might not seem like it right now, but I am such an introvert. And
Right.
so I'm like that awkward wallflower person when
Mm-hmm.
I'm someplace for the first time. I don't know anybody.
Oh yeah.
So my ex-husband was a social butterfly. And so he was like walking around, talking to everybody, making friends, meeting people. And I was standing in the back. And this this woman came up to me and basically was like, you know, I totally know how you feel. Can we be awkward together? Like,
Oh.
whatever. And she became one of my best friends. And she was going to school to be a counselor, and I was like going to school for ministry. And so we just had a lot in common. And um she and her husband, who was a pastor on staff, ended up kind of being like our mentors. And we would hang out with them all the time. And he was my ex's accountability partner.
Oh, that's nice.
Like I didn't have to worry about it anymore. And so we were getting counseling, we had accountability, we had this like really tight friendship. We spent like every Friday night over there.
Yeah.
We called it fire pit time, and we would sit around the fire pit, we would pray, we would talk about God, and like it was probably one of the sweetest seasons of my life.
Yeah.
And then um he got an assignment to Hawaii for like 3 or 4 weeks. And I ended up going for 2 weeks. And
Mm-hmm.
it was so amazing. So we decided after Hawaii that we were going to renew our vows. He applied for a position in Hawaii. We really thought he was a shoo-in. They had asked him to apply. And so we we weren't sure what to do. Like moving to Hawaii is a really big deal. Like
Right.
there's a lot that goes into it, and
Right.
it's a huge life change. So we were praying about it with our friends, and we would go over for fire pit time and we would pray. And my ex-husband started falling asleep while we were praying, and I was like,
Yeah.
one, rude. Two, like we're praying about something for you and you can't even stay awake. Like
Right. Right.
you're the one that wants this job in Hawaii. Like
Was he
get your
faking
stuff
it?
together. Like what are you doing?
Yeah.
So I started feeling like a little bit uncomfortable, like maybe something's going on. And I found a post-it note on the couch that had like what looked like a username, like the beginning of an email address, but without
Okay.
like the whole thing. And I was like, hmm,
Mm.
that seems a little sketchy. I don't
Oh,
know.
jeez.
So I went to the pastor, his accountability partner, and I was like, should I be worried? And he was like, no, there's nothing going on. And I was like, are you
Well, I
sure?
mean, I was gonna say he only knows as much as your ex-husband would be telling him.
Okay, see, that's the hard part. Like, even when you're in counseling, Like
Yeah.
if your spouse, your significant other or whatever is like,
Right.
sure, I'll go to counseling, they can only get as much help as they actually want.
Right.
You can only get as much accountability as you actually want. If you're not telling people what's going on in your life,
Right.
right? So I was like, okay, whatever. So I was in school, and I think by that point I had switched my major and I was studying psychology to go into counseling. And I was actually in a chapter on sex addiction. I was like reading that chapter,
Wow.
and I needed to do my homework. My computer was acting up, so I grabbed his laptop and I opened it up. And because he was never very bright about this kind of stuff, he hadn't closed down the programs that he had been using last.
Oh my gosh.
And it was all these single sites. And he
Ugh.
was talking to, I kid you not, at least 30 women.
Oh my gosh.
Um, and what he would tell them was horrific. Like, he would tell them that he was divorced, he had walked on me in bed with his best friend in our
Oh
house.
my
Like,
gosh.
he had this whole like martyr story about
Yeah.
how I had broken his heart
Oh
and
my
I had been a
gosh.
horrible woman and an awful wife and had lied to him and told him I was a Christian, but I wasn't. He basically portrayed me as what he had been doing our entire marriage
Right.
and like turned it around. And so we had all these women that he was talking to again. And um, here we are, like, we're talking about moving to Hawaii and we're praying about all this stuff. And he's got all this stuff going on, all this junk. And so I confronted him, and like
Okay.
many men in this situation, he would only ever confess to what he had already been confronted with.
Oh,
So it's not like he ever came clean.
okay.
He would say, "You're right, I did that," if I had proof to show him.
Oh,
Like, if I
right.
went to him and said, "I know you're doing this," he'd be
Right.
like, "No, I'm not."
Yeah.
And then I would say, "I've seen the emails." He would say, "Okay, you're right."
Oh, wow.
But he would never like say, "This is also what I'm doing," or "This is what's really going on," or "This is how big the problem is." It was never like that. He was only ever sorry he got caught. Like, there was
Right.
just never any true,
Wow.
like, "I'm sorry for what I've done to you and to our relationship and our marriage and the trust that we were supposed to have." So I went to the couple that was mentoring us, and I was like,
Yeah.
I don't even
Wow.
know what to do. And she was like, "Do you want to stay? Like, do you want to work on this?" And I was like, "I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do."
So even then, you
Um,
were still not even sure about leaving.
if he had said he was sorry and he was serious about getting help, I probably would have stayed. But he looked at me and he said, "I'm not going to change. I don't want to change.
Wow.
You should just leave."
That is
And
a
I was like,
blessing. Yes. If you ever hear that, run for your lives. Because
"Don't fight.
don't fight
Don't
it.
fight to stay. Just leave. Believe people when they say who they are."
Yes.
So
Wow.
again, my parents are amazing. They were so hurt. They were so hurt when I told
Yeah.
them the first time that I was going to get divorced, and then I didn't. Um,
Yeah.
because they knew how much I was hurting, and they knew what he was doing to me.
Yeah.
And so when I called my mom after he said he wasn't going to change, I said, "Mom, I want to come home."
Yeah.
And my parents were at my door the next day with a
Oh
U-Haul
my
truck.
gosh. That's amazing.
They moved me home again. They took care of everything. I lived with them. And I lived with them off and on until I got married again. But they were there again. There was no recrimination. There was no judgment. There was no "I told you so." They
Yeah.
were just so happy to have me home. Now, I'm sure they feel those things. I'm sure that they've had those conversations between themselves,
Oh,
like,
sure,
oh
of
my gosh, I
course.
wish she had just listened to us.
Yeah, of course. But that's not
But
something you want to say.
they never said that to me. They were always just so supportive and just so
That's amazing.
they made themselves available to help me. And it was really incredible because, again, like where where would I have gone? I had all these health issues. I
Yeah,
didn't work. I was in school.
right.
How would I have left if my
Yes.
parents weren't, willing to take me in, to help me, to
Yeah.
be that safety net for me? And so, um,
Well, I just want to say thank you for being honest about staying so many times. And even now saying, if he would have said he was sorry, I would have stayed again. You know what I mean? Because
I would have,
you're not the only one who's done that.
yeah,
Because like you said, which I think was very insightful, we're getting something out of it too. Look, I did it too. Look, I was in it for 33 years with
yeah,
my ex. And if he threw me a bone, if he fed me a crumb, I stayed because that's how they get you to stay. Is I'm
yeah,
sorry. Well, I'm sorry. He never said I'm sorry. Well, those words I've never heard. But if he
yeah,
if he so if we somehow worked out the situation, okay, then I stayed. I just
mhm,
continued to stay, despite the fact that there were things going on that I didn't like.
yeah,
I just continued to stay because what was I getting out of it? I'm going to sit down and really think about that one. That was really good.
yeah. I
I
think,
think it's a good way to be insightful.
like, you know, there's a lot of, having grown up going to church and
Hmm.
having been in such a controlling, abusive situation with the crazy cult,
Yeah,
there was a lot of stigma attached to divorce for me.
right. Of
Um,
course.
I felt like a failure. I
Yeah,
felt like I had walked away from a promise I made to God. Like, there
right,
was just a lot of stuff there. And so that's part of why I stayed.
right.
Like, I was getting something out of it, but also I was going to lose something
Yeah,
of who I believed myself to be,
right,
of the dream that I had for what marriage was going to look like.
right.
It's a lot to lose.
Hmm.
It's a lot to walk away from. And
Yeah,
then to have to, look in the mirror and feel like I'm a divorced person.
yeah,
That was a lot for me.
yeah. When even if you go by the Bible, he doesn't want you to stay in an abusive situation. That's not what he's about. And
Yeah.
so, and
Yeah.
even in marriage, so that, and I know that that's a stigma in the church, in any church,
Yeah.
and so it's hard. But women aren't supposed to be staying in abusive relationships, and I have learned that 1 in 4 Christian women are sitting in abusive relationships, and that's only the ones who have said something. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Because there are
Because
so many of us who don't ever say anything
no,
for
because you're
all the reasons
told.
that we've talked about.
Right. You're told the things you talked about. What did you do?
Right.
Have you prayed for him? Submit more. Be more available. All those things. And even like you said, if those words weren't said to you directly, sometimes they were, but sometimes they weren't. It was what you learned and what was ingrained in
Hmm.
you while you were
Right.
being, indoctrinated in your cult or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, those things are heard other places too. Oh my gosh, the shame. Or, it's like, well, but you don't want to sit in a marriage, though. That's what I was getting out of it too. In my marriage was I just thought I'd always be married and we just work it out. But when the other partner isn't willing to work it out, that's the difference.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can't have a one-sided marriage. Marriage does not work that way. It's not
No.
100% me and 0% you or 10% you.
No.
That's not the way marriage works. So, I want to know where you're at now, because I just love your story of, I know you're so we don't have to go into like a really long discussion about this, but I do want you to tell people that
Where
like
I'm at now.
where you're at now. Because it's a good
So
story.
I also met my current husband in the crazy cult.
I love that.
It's just kind of, it's nuts. Back when we were both in college, like back in the late 90s, we were in a campus ministry, kind of adjacent. He was in Dayton and I was in Cincinnati, and we were
Okay.
close enough that we would do things together as a campus ministry. And so I saw him, I knew of him. We were
Okay.
not friends. We weren't close.
Okay.
We just knew of each other, right?
Yeah.
And so like 20 years later, I was overseeing a women's transitional living home, where it's essentially like, I've been where you're at, friends, like, let me help you learn how to find healing and overcome and put your life back together.
Yes.
Which was an amazing experience. And in a like crazy, I was supposed to follow all of the rules for the women at the house, and they weren't allowed to date because they were there to work on themselves. They were there to work
Okay.
on getting their kids back or growing their relationship with God or whatever it was. And so I was like, okay, because I am not that far out of being divorced. I'm totally fine with that. I don't think I'm going to be dating anytime soon anyway. And then my boss came to me and she's like, hey, listen, if God brings somebody into your life, who am I to like stand in
Wow.
his way? And I was like, okay, but
Did
again,
she just have a feeling? Is that why?
I
Or
don't
what?
know. It was so
Okay.
crazy. And I
Okay.
was like, I don't see that happening, but okay. And so meantime, I had met this girl who was in a singles ministry in like the northern part of Cincinnati that I never went to. Like, it was
Okay.
really far away. But she had come to visit the church that I went to because she had some friends there. We got to know each other. She was in ministry, I was in ministry. So we went to lunch and we became friends on Facebook. Well, Facebook has that fun feature where it recommends people that when like you have friends in common, the
Yes.
mutual friends. And so like 2 weeks after my boss says I should be allowed to date, I get this message from this guy. And he's like, hey, do you remember me?
Oh my gosh. And you're like,
And I
you
thought to
belong to that
myself,
cult.
yes, I do. And we're getting married.
Did you say that?
Why would some dude reach out to me if he was not the person that like all of this was happening
Oh
because
my
of?
gosh, you're so crazy.
It was crazy. It was so crazy. I was having coffee with my best friend later that day, and he was like, what is wrong with you? And I was like, I'm pretty sure I asked a boy out on a date and we're getting married. And he was like,
You're like, I'm
what?
just jumping all the way.
Like,
Wow, that's
this is what's
amazing.
going on. So we started seeing each other, and like he had left, I had left, he had joined another church, I had,
Uh-huh.
joined another church, we had done counseling, both of us, and we had really like worked on leaving behind what was bad, what was untrue, what was toxic,
Yes.
keeping what was good, keeping what was of the Bible. And there's that scripture, if it's good, if it's noble, if it's praiseworthy, like think on such
Yes.
things. So we really wanted to focus on like what were those things. And he reached out to me because he was like, he has a heart to make sure that people are okay after they
Oh,
leave
okay.
this particular church. And so he wanted to make sure, like, have you left? Are you doing okay? Where are you at?
Oh, that's awesome.
Um, because he's just passionate about that. He loves helping people in that area. And so I was like, yeah, I've left. I'm doing really well. Like, this is what I'm doing. And we ended up getting coffee. It became a date. Like halfway through, we were like, hey, do you want this to be a date? Do you? We were so awkward.
You're so
And so then it
funny.
was. And then all of a sudden, like, we were together, and then we were engaged, and then we were getting married. And it was just so so wild and so redemptive. Like there was just so much
Oh,
beauty from ashes in it. And like
oh my
my
gosh.
ex-husband and I had dealt with infertility the entire time we were married.
Yeah.
Like every reproductive endocrinologist, like the major specialists I went to were like, you will never conceive on
Oh
your
my
own. It
gosh.
is just not
Well,
possible.
thank
It's not
God.
happening.
What a protection. Wow.
It was amazing because we got married in January. I miscarried in February, which was obviously very, very sad. But at the same time, I was like, okay, like
Oh,
maybe there's hope. I don't know.
right.
Um, by Mother's Day of that year, I was pregnant with our daughter. And so,
Wow.
and it was just beautiful. Like people had come up to me. I was so heartbroken. I mean, I had dealt with infertility. Mother's Day was already hard for me. Then I had a miscarriage and I was just like, oh my gosh, like I was so heartbroken that day. And so I'm sitting in church crying. Like 3 or 4 different people came up to me and were like, I just feel like I'm supposed to tell you God sees, He knows, He loves you, He cares.
Oh.
I was such a hot mess. And like we did not know I was pregnant at that very exact moment.
Oh, that's
Like,
amazing.
um, and so then we had Josie, and 6 months later, I was pregnant with Nate. And so we have a
Oh,
boy and a girl, and
oh my
like
gosh.
we have so much fun. And he is so amazing. Like his heart to help people who are coming out of the crazy cult is just so beautiful. Like he's so passionate about it.
That's
And
amazing.
he's just brilliant. Like he writes like master's level thesis papers about like the deeper theology behind cults and like
Okay.
all this
Oh,
stuff. And he does his own podcasts with people. Like he's, guests on different podcasts talking
oh,
about it.
interesting. Okay.
Um, and he works with, there's a really incredible website. If anybody that is involved with,
Yeah.
um, specifically with the ICOC, it's the International Churches of Christ, but just
Mhm.
any like toxic
Yep.
abusive church situation. The website is reveal.org.
And
And
we'll include that in the show notes.
yeah,
Those links will be in there.
and my husband helps maintain that, and
Okay.
he has a lot of papers published there. Um, and he's always available to talk to people who are leaving.
Wow.
Um, and one of the really cool things that we get to do together is talk to people. So he comes in and he talks to people about like the really deep theological things, like what is true, what is not, what does the Bible say,
Right.
what are the like old church things, like
Well, especially when you're sitting in a cult and they're telling you this is the way and that's it. You know what I mean? Like
right, exactly.
you're not having discussions. It's nice to be able to have discussions. And that's the thing that, even pastors that stand on a pulpit, okay, or on the stage or whatever, you're allowed to ask them questions and question them.
Absolutely.
You're allowed to say, I don't understand why this is this way. If they
Yeah,
don't allow that, that's actually a red flag,
it's a
that,
huge red flag. It's a huge red flag.
yeah, like you ask
The
too many questions. And if people say, because I know I have friends who they were told that you ask too many questions. No, you don't ask too many questions. You're asking questions they don't like.
Exactly, your questions make me uncomfortable is really what that says.
That's right.
So he goes in with like the deeper theological stuff, and then I join with him and we talk about like reestablishing trust and relationships
That's
and how to
amazing.
heal from the things that you've gone through from like a counseling relational
Yes.
perspective. And so it's been really cool to see God use what we both went through and the hurts that we experienced,
Yes.
to redeem those. And now we have this opportunity to help other people find healing. And so
That's
that has been
amazing.
probably one of the most beautiful things to come out of all of it.
Oh my gosh. That is such a good story. Amanda, you're so amazing. That
Oh, thank
is
you, friend.
That is, I mean, it really is. It's amazing. I mean, look, you just get out look, that would have been a good end of the story, but that you guys are able to help other
Yeah.
people, that you guys were both in it, so you know firsthand, you know, not just a cult, but toxic relationships and any kind of
Mhm.
dishonesty that way that you're going through. I have a friend who works on different things, and also like your employers or where you're
Mhm.
working and people that you live in this world with, that how to live with people who are unhealthy or toxic, and it's
Yeah.
unfortunately they're everywhere. That we just have to learn our boundaries and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, I was actually just thinking that a couple of the classes that I took um at the counseling center that I went to
yeah.
were boundaries and then safe people.
Yeah.
And they're both Cloud and Townsend, like their
Okay.
stuff. Very, very popular in terms of like how Christians can put boundaries in place with people, because
Yeah.
specifically for Christians, sometimes it's a difficult thing because we're told we should love everybody and be nice and
Right.
accepting and caring and whatever. But that's not even how Jesus lived. Like Jesus
No.
would say, like, okay, you can follow me or not, that's your choice. But
Right.
then if people said, well, I don't want to do that, then he was like, okay.
Right. You have, and that's the biggest thing, is that free will. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, well, gosh, we talked for a long time, but I knew it was going to be a
Sorry.
lot. No, no, don't you dare say you're sorry, because I knew it was going to be a long story, but I just knew it was going to be needed, because
Yeah.
I think that we don't have to have been in a cult for something in your story to resonate, okay? Because there's so many things. What am I getting out of this, right? We do that in our everyday life. That's part of
Right.
codependent. That's another thing that people can study, is codependency, because
Right.
what
Yes.
are we getting out of an abusive relationship? We're getting something out of it. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
No matter, those kinds of things. So thank you for your honesty. Thank you for
Mhm.
sharing everything with us. Thank you for being so transparent. Your story is fascinating. I'm so glad you guys are helping other people. And
Thank you.
yeah, I have to check out your other podcast. The other part. Do you do the podcast with your?
I don't. We've talked about it,
Oh,
but we have
okay.
very young children right now.
Yes.
So producing our own podcast might be a little like
Yes.
biting off more than
There
we can
might be
chew
too
right
much.
now.
Well, it might have to be a family affair.
Yes. But he has been a guest on other podcasts, and
Okay.
he um and the person who oversees reveal.org
Yeah.
are talking about starting a podcast specifically about toxic churches and
Okay.
what that looks like. So
Yeah.
that is very exciting.
That is. I just really like your point of view of coming at it from a trust point of view, because I think you gave us some good insight on that kind of stuff. And I mean, we could have talked for 100 more hours on this, so
I
I know
know.
there's more to it. So, well, we will put all of the links in the show notes. We'll put whatever we can in there, and make sure you give me your husband's podcast as well, because that's of for anybody who's interested in that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then, of course, getting help. And we'll put some information in there about boundaries or anything like that, so that people
Yeah,
can learn, what it looks like to have boundaries. And it doesn't make you a bad person to set boundaries, So, and
not at all.
no, not at all. Well, thank you again for being here. I so appreciate it. I
Thank
really
you. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Of course. All right, guys, we will talk to you next time. If any of this resonated with you today, will you please go to our social media and check out Amanda's picture? She'll have some pictures during the time that her episode is out, and you can comment, or if you have any questions, we'd be glad to check them out. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.